I am able to share with you my review of the Exo-6 1/6 scale Lieutenant Commander data. I say finally because if you purchased direct from Exo-6 in the US, you probably would have received your data just after Christmas. Over here in the UK, going through an aggregator, I had to wait until April, so a little bit of a delay there, get my hands on this fella, but he's here now. I'm super excited to give you my thoughts on this figure. So as ever, let's kick off by taking a look at the packaging, and there's probably no real surprises here. This is the standard design for this line, and it works pretty well. Now, the one thing I should mention, of course, is that I have gone for the SX version, which they tend to do two versions. I think there's Essentials and Standard, and I think Standard is the deluxe version and the Essentials is the bare bones version. It's very confusing, and my apologies if I'm using the wrong terminology there. Nevertheless, this is the deluxe version of data with some of the extra accessories. Now, as ever, they've opted for a matte background, which is pretty much just a black border, really. There's not an awful lot of detail in the background here. We have the Star Trek logo at the top of the package. We have this nice, really wonderfully illustrated image of Captain Picard, which wraps around to the side of the package, which we'll look at in a moment. And of course, we have this very glossy photo of the action figure itself and a nice head portrait here. So this looks really displayable. I think it looks quite nice. It's a little bit bland. It's not the most exciting colour scheme in the world, but I still think this is, very presentable and displayable. Now, I did mention that side panel, so if we look here, we can see that that wonderful artwork continues all the way around. Again, this isn't brand new. We've seen this in all of the next generation releases thus far, and we'll probably see it in the future as well. I think so far we've only had it on Q. I could be wrong on that, but this is really beautiful artwork. I love these side panels that they do on Exo-6, and I can't say anything to fault this. I just think it looks magnificent. And if we flip the box round, we can see the reverse here. This is a little bit more bare bones. I do like the foil Star Trek logo at the top of the packaging, although obviously it's the original series font and not the next generation font. Very minor quibble there. Otherwise, we have a nice photo of the figure and all of his various accessories, which is really quite fun. And then we have a list of the contents and some credits and small prints on the back. I can't say too much about this. It's pretty bland. It's not particularly displayable. It's not something you're going to really want to put on show. It's just functional, I think, more than anything else. And then, of course, the slipcover does come off. You simply slide it up, and underneath we see another box, and this is a window display showing off the figure and all of his accessories. Again, not really an awful lot going on here. There's no real designs on the side panels or the back of the box. It's pretty much just a black void, but yeah, it does the job. So then, looking at the figure himself, I have to say I am amazingly impressed with the overall presentation, and in particular the tailoring on this figure, because it's pretty gorgeous and it's almost pitch perfect. But if we start off by talking about the head sculpt, I've got a couple of issues here. Now, I think in terms of the likeness, I think they've done a really good job. This is pretty faithful to what we see on screen. It's a very good likeness of Brent Spiner. Having said that, I'm not quite sure about the eyes. They look a little bit too narrow, a little bit too squinty, tends to have a little bit bigger eyes, generally speaking, but that's a very minor quibble, and I suppose it depends what reference point you're using for the sculpt as a rule. Now, otherwise, the paint apps are really nicely applied. The eyes are in particular really well done. I like how they've captured the yellow there. That looks to be pretty much spot on. I think they've done a really good job with this. Again, minor criticism, but the flesh tone seems to be off a little bit, and by that I mean that my impression of Data is that he should have a lot whiter skin. Now, I'm not saying it should be stark white and really glowing white, but he had a lot whiter skin tone than the rest of the cast, obviously to denote that he was an android and wasn't quite human, whereas the flesh tone here just looks a little bit too pink for my liking. It just seems a little bit off. Now, the other thing I wanted to point out is that this isn't the first time we've had a Commander Data figure. In fact, we did have one from Exo-6 from the First Contact line, which we haven't had a figure from that line for quite a while now. In fact, they've only done 2 releases thus far. And I wanted to compare what these 2 head sculpts look like. Now, I don't own that data, so I am relying on reference material here. I'm not sure if this is a new sculpt. They're so similar, it's really difficult to tell whether a new sculpt has been commissioned here or whether they're recycling the one that already existed. Okay, so I did want to spend a little bit of time talking about this tailoring because I think this is absolutely immaculate. I think they've done a really, really great job because this fits like a glove. This looks exactly like it does in the show, and it's perfect, I think. So there's some lovely little details here. Of course, he's got his pips at the top of his collar there. They are accurate to what we see on screen, which is marvelous. Of course, we also have his com badge, which is a separate piece that is glued on. This looks really, really nice. Everything looks perfectly in proportion, and it just looks really, really smart. Now, the colouring of the tunic is quite interesting because when this line was first announced, going back a good few years now, I believe the intention was for them to actually release 2 versions of each figure, believe it or not. One was going to be based on what we see on screen, so what our TVs were projecting, and one was going to be based on the on-set costume because the colorization was slightly different. One was slightly brighter versus one that was slightly darker. I can't remember which was which. I think the TV version is the one that's slightly darker, whereas on set there is slightly brighter. I believe that's the right way around. Nevertheless, that never transpired, so we are only getting the one option, although we do have the standard version or the non-deluxe version of this figure. There's no colour difference to the actual tunic itself. Now, the colour they've gone for is the slightly muted colour. This is the darker one. For me personally, if I had the choice, I would probably opt for the brighter colours, just because I like colour in my toys. But I think this is perfectly fine. This, again, seems pretty screen accurate to for my liking, and I can't really fault it. I think this looks really good. And as this is a 2-piece uniform, I was really interested to see how they've managed to get it so tight and how it just looks perfect. And that has been achieved through braces, which works really, really well. It holds the pants up and it holds the top in place, so this looks very snug and shouldn't become loose or shabby over time. So top marks for this. All the hands are very nicely sculpted. There's a lot of detail here, a lot of different lines and veins shown, which is really, really cool. Again, the flesh tone is just slightly off for my liking, but it is consistent with the head sculpt. And one thing I think you can see here in this image is the slight grain, the slight metallic quality to the hands, to the flesh tone, which I do think works really well. And I have to say, from a distance, he looks a lot paler than he does up close. Now, where his trousers meet his boots, they have opted to have a wraparound elastic strap go over the boot again to keep those trousers nice and tight and flush to the boot there, which looks really, really good. And whilst we're looking at the stand, of course, this is the standard display stand for Exo-6 Star Trek figures. It's the transporter stand that we've seen many, many times before at this point. You know my thoughts on this. I'm not going to talk too much about it. And for those who are curious, on the sole of his boot we can actually see a little bit of detailing on the heel, and the heel only, which is unusual, but there you can see the elastic strap going under the boot there to make sure that the trouser leg meets the boot and is always consistently flush, which is a really nice touch. And finally, I should mention that he also has functional working pockets, which is really cool because I didn't know they actually had pockets in the next generation, so that's actually a really nice detail. So looking at the articulation, there is a ball joint in the top of the neck allowing the head to spin from side to side and indeed all the way around, and it can also lean a good distance left and right as well, which is going to be very important for this character when posing. The head can bend forwards and backwards as well, again a really healthy range here, which is nice to see. There's a ball joint in the shoulder allowing the arm to lift up and out, and it takes a little bit of perseverance here, having to be very careful with it, but it can actually lift up a really good distance, being mindful of the costume of course. There is also a butterfly wing joint here as well, allowing the arm to really fold backwards and come forwards a good distance as well, which is lovely. There is a complementary bicep swivel at the very top there, which is lovely, and of course there is a double joint at the elbow allowing the hand to go all the way back to the head there, which is absolutely fantastic. And I should say these joints are really nice and stiff and fluid, so this real sign of quality here as well. There is a pin swivel at the wrist of course, so the hand will rotate all the way around and it will hinge forwards and backwards. There's a ball joint in the waist allowing the figure to move from side to side, but also lean left and right. The figure can also bend forwards and backwards, as you would hope. Again, a pretty good range here. There are ball joints in the hips allowing the legs to kick out to the side. Sadly, you can only go so far with this because the material is quite restrictive and you don't want to cause any tears here. There's also a thigh swivel at the top there. The legs will kick forwards a little bit, they'll kick backwards again with some restraint due to the material. There is a double joint at the knee allowing that lower leg to kick all the way back, and we have a ball joint at the ankle allowing the foot to hinge forwards and backwards, but also rotate from side to side. I'm pleased to say that Data comes with a plethora of accessories. Now, if you went for the Special Deluxe Edition, as I have, you get a few more than you do with the standard or the box standard release, and I can't remember the terminology, sorry. But with the Special Release, you get an additional 5 hands, a lot of different variation here between fists, gripping hands, and open palm hands. We get a tricorder and a pouch, we get a phaser and a pouch, we get a data pad, we get an alternate head, and we get 2 versions of Spot, one crouching and one draped, which is pretty cool. And both of these are very nicely sculpted, very nicely painted as well. They are not articulated in any way, but they look really, really nice. Now, before I look at the alternative head sculpt, I did want to point out that on the existing head sculpt, the one that comes on the body, you will see a little bit of tanning, ink running from the costume onto the baseline of the neck. Now, you can't see it when it's actually on display, which is great, but I did want to note that this does happen, so it might influence your decision which head you want to display on a long-term basis. Okay, so looking at the alternate head, I'm struggling to see much of a difference. Here is the first head that we saw earlier. These look very, very close to me. I don't know if they've just recycled the head. I suspect maybe they have. I believe this was meant to be a slightly different sculpt, but it looks the same to me. It's very, very difficult to see much in the way of difference. Now, I could be wrong, someone could correct me, but this looks too close. But the major difference of this alternate head is, of course, it actually has the exposed wiring. There's actually a hairpiece that you can clip on or remove, and it's actually kind of fiddly to get off, to be honest. It's really stuck in there, which is good, but yeah, you have to be very careful, very dexterous getting it off. And I think the detailing here looks really nice. There's a number of different wires and circuits and things, lots of different colours being used, which is great. I'm not sure why they didn't just give us this one head as standard. Maybe they felt that some people would have been upset by having the hairpiece when it's in place looking a little bit jagged, not quite right, having that sort of kind of cut out, which I can understand. But I think this looks really good. I have no real complaints about this. The square tricorder pocket does have a magnet, and it does fit onto his belt, which of course there is a magnetised belt underneath, which is absolutely fantastic. I love this. We've seen this before with the QMX figures, so it's really nice to carry this feature over. I think it works a real treat, and it's kind of magical. The tricorder itself is lovely, a lot of detailing here, a lot of different colours. I think this looks absolutely fantastic. Again, they are utilising magnets. We have had this piece several times before, but I love how this comes apart and folds up using magnets. It's so clever, and it just looks fantastic. And of course that folds up and it fits nicely into that pocket there, which is absolutely lovely stuff. Similarly, we have the same thing with the phaser pouch as well. Again, another magnet there that just clips onto the belt. And then we have the phaser, which again, very nicely sculpted, some nice colouring here, fine details, pretty accurate to what we see on screen, and that just slots very nice and easily into that pouch. Each of the hands is carefully sculpted as you would hope, so they can perfectly hold each of the various accessories. So of course here you can see him holding his face with the phaser hand, which looks beautiful and seamless. I love this. Likewise, holding the tricorder there just looks great. I love these Star Trek characters being able to hold all these various gadgets and accessories. It just looks really, really cool. Likewise, there's no issues when it comes to holding the more nimble, thinner, smaller accessories as well. The data pad, for example, here is a very thin piece of plastic, but he has a hand perfect for that, gripping it between his thumb and forefinger, and it just looks tailor-made as if it was, of course. And the data pad itself is gorgeous. I think they've done a really nice job. It's really nice to see the schematic there of the Enterprise. Again, pretty spot on for what we see in this show. I love this. I think it looks absolutely phenomenal. And of course there's enough accessories here to mix and match and create all sorts of different poses and looks for the character, which is absolutely fantastic. And of course the posability, the articulation allows you to display this character in all sorts of unique poses, particularly with the head. I think is very important for Data, the way he holds his head, and you're able to capture that pretty much perfectly, which is absolutely lovely stuff. I'm also super impressed with Spot. I love that we've got 2 versions of Spot, and this draped version is probably my preference. If I'm going to put him on display, this is probably how I'm going to do it, to be honest. Maximising the amount of accessories I can have. I just think this looks really cool. It looks very distinct, it's very different and unique, and it's going to look really great in the fuller collection when we get the whole crew together, I think. All in all then, for me, Data is a massive hit. I think this is one of the better releases in this line. There's been certain quibbles. It's a nice line, but there's been quibbles with certain releases here and there, but this is a fantastic release, and so far it's the best release of 2024 in my opinion, or was it 2023, depending on when you got yours. But no, this is a fantastic figure, and it set the bar really high for future releases. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like and remember to subscribe as there'll be plenty more videos soon.